Salut. I've just heard from your worried doctor. Apparently, your character poses are too stiff. That's concerning. So in this week's YouTube Art School episode, I'll quickly show you everything you need to know to draw very dynamic poses. It's simpler than you might think, and quickly, class is starting, we're gonna be late. All right, class is in session. Pay attention. Every character artist wants to be able to draw cool dynamic poses. Yes, you do too. It's the law. It's almost as important as having good anatomy when it comes to the wow factor of a character drawing. And if you want to get good at this stuff, well, there's only really 8 rules that I just made up, more like guidelines, that you gotta keep in mind when drawing poses to just crush it every time. This is the same stuff that I tell my students, and you get it for free. Wow, and that's value. Just kidding, it's not free. It'll cost you 1 like or 1 sub. What the heck, there's no way I can verify if you paid or not, so let's get right into it. Oh, that's not dynamic at all, is it? The first rule of dynamic poses is to avoid symmetry. Symmetry makes everything feel more static. So for this first example, I'll just add the bare minimum, just breaking up the symmetry by offsetting the shoulders and the hips instead of keeping them parallel. Just this little change already makes the pose a lot more dynamic, like there was this big gust of wind and she lost her balance a bit or something. But we're only getting started. The more of these rules that you keep in mind, when drawing every pose, the more dynamic the pose will get. So the more the better. The second rule is for the body to face away from the camera. For the next example here, our faceless lady will be facing towards the side. And without even doing anything with her arms, the body being rotated naturally introduces a lot of dynamism. Why though? Well, imagine you're standing, talking to somebody. Well, you're likely to be facing each other in a static pose, maybe like the first example we saw. Now, in what kind of scenario would that person not be facing you? Maybe if they're about to walk away, right? Maybe you're boring and she's just leaving. So that body rotation can suggest an action. Maybe she's about to engage and talk. Maybe she's about to leave. And that's dynamic. It suggests a chain of events. Now, with rule number 3, we'll add to the dynamism by introducing a body twist, or by bending the arms or legs, or both combined. Basically, the goal is to have different parts of the body facing in different directions. The torso facing one way and the legs facing another maybe. In the case of this character here, the hands are facing different directions. The head is facing towards the left, the torso is pointed towards the right, the pelvis is pointed at the camera, and both legs are also pointed in different directions. Obviously, it doesn't need to be this exaggerated, but keep this in mind when drawing poses. It really helps to spice things up. Having the torso and the hips at least facing in different directions should be kind of the bare minimum for a dynamic pose. And now, before I move on to the more advanced rules, I want to mention a big update for my complete art education program, Art School for Digital Artists. I just completed the 20-ish month-long weekly study companion guide that I've been working on forever now. It's finally done, and I'm super excited to add it to the program for all existing and new students. This will hopefully help those of you looking for a lot more structure in your studies when going through the Art School program, and hopefully help you get better significantly faster. I'm working on the final touches to make it nice and pretty, so you can expect it to be added to the program sometimes next week. Check your email notifications. And if you haven't joined us yet, you're definitely missing out. The price of the program will be increasing next month, but I'm running a big sale until then for the whole month, so click the link in the video description to check it out. It will never be this cheap again. I don't want you to miss out if you're interested. Oh snap! Back to dynamic poses. Rule number 4, be mindful of the transfer of energy. Is this a physics class? For standing characters, everything goes back to the ground that they stand on. It might sound complicated, but it's quite simple. If the character is jumping from the ground, or just taking a step, or resting more on one leg than the other, like this faceless lady, well, there's going to be more weight applied to that leg than the other, right? But it's easier to visualize the impact if you think of this as energy that flows from the ground and into your character. As the energy travels up the leg and into the pelvis, it hits her right hip with more force, which in turn tilts the pelvis. And now to maintain balance in her pose, well, the character has to compensate by tilting her shoulders. And we get this nice transfer of energy from the ground and all the way into the spine, which is super dynamic. If we didn't do that though, and just left the torso follow along with the pelvis rotation, well, we get a pose that doesn't work anymore. That's off balance. Now, the right leg that initially had minimal weight on it is supporting the entire weight of the character. So think of how that energy travels and the path that it takes. Now, the fifth rule is directly related to the fourth, so I'll keep it very short. That line of energy that I just talked about is basically the line of action that, you would draw when practicing gesture drawing. The main thing that's important to keep in mind is that it should flow. It should always either be an S curve or a C curve. That's all. You just can't break the flow of that energy. Otherwise, bad things will happen. Probably. The next rule to follow for more dynamic poses is to think of the pose as mid-action. Characters in motion are by default dynamic. So think of your characters as performing an action and draw it mid-action. Easy. There's nothing wrong with idle characters, of course, it's just not as dynamic. The one I'm drawing here is jumping. She's going from point A to point B, and the pose is somewhere in the middle. Now, sometimes the character will just strike a cool pose, and that works too, like this one. It works as long as you keep in mind the other rules. But characters drawn mid-action are always dynamic by default. So if your mind goes blank when thinking of a pose, think of an action first. Now, rule number 7 is to add depth to your poses. Introduce perspective. Most of the characters so far have been on a single line, but to add a ton of dynamism to your poses, you should try to think in 3D, where certain parts of the character are further back and others are coming towards the camera, towards the viewer. This is easy to notice if you look at her feet here. One is clearly further back, right below her pelvis, while the other one is coming towards us. The right arm, on the other hand, is not contributing too much to the perspective since it's going straight down towards the ground, but the other arm, just like the leg, is also reaching in our direction as if she's trying to grab and steal your clothes. Now, this particular pose is very dynamic because it follows all the rules that I've mentioned so far. It's not a symmetrical pose. The character is not facing the camera. There's a torso twist and her limbs are bent. The energy from the ground transfers nicely into her spine, allowing her to maintain her balance. And it's a nice C curve, so it flows nicely. She's also mid-action, trying to grab something. Success. Now, the final rule that we can add is foreshortening. The moment you have any kind of depth or perspective, like we just saw, adding foreshortening should instantly crank up the dynamism of the pose. And to prove it, let's see the same pose but without the foreshortening, simply maintaining basic character proportions. Oh, still works, but it looks a bit flat. The idea is that whatever is meant to be closer to the imaginary camera that we're looking at this character through, that thing should appear bigger. And everything further back in the scene should in turn appear smaller. We understand that both the hands and the feet are the same size, but they appear to be of different sizes because of the aggressive perspective. With a real camera, you would get this kind of foreshortening effect if you were really close to the subject as the photographer. But if you're instead taking a photo from really, really far away, it would instead appear flatter, like the version without the foreshortening. So the foreshortened version really gives us the impression that we're really close to the action, that we're right there next to the character. And that's very dynamic. And that's gonna be it for this week's class. With these 8 rules, your character poses should never lack dynamism anymore. And once again, you don't need to use all 8 rules every time you draw a new pose, but the more you follow, the more dynamic the pose should be. Hope that was helpful. Let me know in the comments. And also let me know if there's anything that you're struggling with that you think others might also benefit from learning about. I might use that as a future topic for a video. And also, since you've been a good student, you get freebies. So the brush that I use for these drawings is my favorite line art brush, and you can download it for free and use it too as part of my custom brush set full of other brushes that I use all the time. You can grab them all with the link in the video description if you haven't already. Now, time to tickle that bell button to be on time for next week's class. But meanwhile, check out these other classes that you might like. I will see you in there.